Hey guys, my name's Dave. Welcome to episode 1 of The Amateur's Noodle. It's me, I'm the amateur. I'm a club level player and I'm attempting to reach expert level strength. I want to go over some of my games that I play with you guys, explain some of the theory, some of the middle game plans, some of my thought processes and my mistakes, as well as that of my opponent. If nothing else, for me to internalize the knowledge and improve, and to hopefully give you guys some benefit as well. And also, maybe you just like hanging out. So, given that this is episode 1, I didn't really make a proper script, and I really should have. Chess is a complicated game. There's going to be some technical issues. I may stutter and step over my words. You'll have to bear with me. I promise it's going to get better as I get better at this. The game I want to go over today is a game I played a couple of days ago on the Lichess 45-45 League, and it's a Queen's Gambit declined Ragozin variation. And the game opened d4, knight f6, I'm playing the white pieces, c4, e6, and I had looked at my opponent's games a little beforehand, and this is largely what I was expecting. I knew that he wanted to play a Nimzo Indian. I was not willing to give him that, so I played knight f3. And here I needed to be prepared for bishop b4 check, b6, some variation of c5 b5 for any sort of Benoni Banco, Queen's Indian, Bogo Indian. I didn't really know what I was going to be playing into here, but I was happy enough not to give him an Nimzo Indian. So as a result, he plays d5, which transposes into a Queen's Gambit declined, and I am much more familiar with. So I played the 3 knights variation with knight c6, knight c3, excuse me, and he played bishop b4 anyway, the Ragozin variation, which is very strong, very solid. It's a top tier grandmaster opening. The main move is normally bishop b7, and there are a tremendous amount of theory following that after bishop f4, bishop g5. But that'll be beyond the scope of today's video. So he plays bishop b4, and white has 3 main responses here. They have bishop g5, they have c takes d, and they have queen a4. Queen a4 check is perhaps the most interesting because it provokes the knight to c6, and the knight is not particularly well placed on c6, but it does block the c7 pawn and make the c7, c5 pawn advance a lot more difficult to obtain. And interestingly enough, white's queen, the job is done on queen a4, so it'll eventually retreat. Queen c2, queen d1, later in the middle game. The other move, bishop g5, is the main move, actually, but it does nothing to dissuade the c7, c5 advance, and that is something you absolutely have to do with the middle game. And c takes d, e takes d is what I play in the Queen's Gambit declined Ragozin variation. It unlocks the light squared bishop, is one of the main drawbacks, but it's worth it because it helps simplify the position. You're looking at a potential Carlsbad position, Carlsbad structure in the middle game with very easy play for the white pieces. So, therefore, c takes d, e takes d, and then bishop g5 is the main move. The main move here for black, by far, is h6. The whole point being that the bishop is forced to retreat, and it can't ever return to the center to help defend the knight, because it's going to be totally locked on playing on the king side after bishop h4. Like, for example, the immediate knight bd7, if you play something like queen c2 and now c5, d takes c5, queen a5, for example, doesn't work particularly well because you can retreat the bishop to overprotect the knight and avoid losing material. So that is a variation that's been played, but h6 is the main move by far. You retreat, and then move 7 for black is actually a major tabia. There's 4 main moves. Castles is the main move that my opponent chose. It's been played in roughly 46% of master games. You need to be prepared for 4 moves here as white. There's the immediate g5, which effectively unpins the bishop and allows the immediate knight e4, and black will be grabbing the dark square bishop. The move is knight d2, forcing the capture. And the compensation will be black's overextended kingside. Castling short is going to be pretty difficult for them for the rest of the game. But it is a very valid continuation. It's been played in 18% of master games. It's actually black's highest winning percentage opening from this tabia, as well as losing. So it's the least drawest option, which makes sense given how imbalanced the game is. There is the immediate c5, where d takes c is one of the responses. There's also e3, and you're going to intend to play against this IQP, whereas now queen bd7, or knight bd7, excuse me, is met by either e3 or queen d4, and if the bishop captures, the queen just drops back, or if the queen puts more pressure on, there's a3. And obviously you're not threatening to capture with the pawn because the pawn is pinned, but you are threatening queen takes b4. So black will have to recapture the pawn with a piece that is not the knight, is the whole point. So, and then we've already discussed knight bd7 in preparation for the c5. So castles is the main move, intending to effectively enter Carlsbad structure. The whole point of a lot of the other moves were in c5 and knight bd7. This knight was always blocking the bishop, so the bishop was not going to play a large role. So castles, e3 is the main move, and then bishop f5 is what my opponent should have played. It's the best move. It's played in 92% of master games. He instead opted for the immediate c6, which I marked as an inaccuracy because I immediately get to counter with bishop d3 to guard this f5 square that the bishop wanted to go to. He instead counters with bishop g4, stubbornly continuing to develop the bishop. This has been played in 2 master games. There's Ivanisevic versus Carbonell Bofill from 2003, and Ringsborg versus De La Calle in 2006. White's pleasantly better here. They're almost +1. The move played in both of those other games is h3. This was a pretty large candidate move for me versus queen b3. h3 I didn't love because at worst, or at the best, if the bishop takes and the queen recaptures, we have a Carlsbad structured middle game where white's plan is going to be the minority advance with b4, b5, a4 in some order, not in that order. And this queen is misplaced on the king side where the play should be on the queen side. So letting black capture the knight and then recapturing with the queen after provoking it misplaces the queen. And furthermore, black need not even recapture. Bishop g5, bishop h5, excuse me, g5, because otherwise what's the point? Bishop g6, And we're trading bishops. Bishop takes g6 does not seem particularly good. It opens the f file for the rook. Something like knight e5 to provoke it. And then they recapture. And my king is a little exposed in the center. And I've got this weak c6 pawn. Particularly if they take the knight with on c3 with check first. So I was really dubious about playing this g4 move. I didn't really understand what I was intending to accomplish by pushing the bishop back to the g6 square. This was actually played in the Ivanisevic Carbonell game, in which he just castled and then eventually played knight e2 to unpin the knight. This was totally reasonable. This is something I could have done, but I didn't want to give my opponent the chance, or I didn't want to pass the tempo to my opponent to allow them to capture this pawn and ruin my pawn structure if they were going to always ruin my pawn structure with h3, g5. So as a result, I played queen b3, understanding that they were going to take and ruin my pawn structure. But I was finishing development, attacking this b7, b4 bishop that's attached to the b7 pawn, effectively provoking the trade. So takes, and then here I make a big mistake. I play queen takes c3, not properly respecting this knight e4 move. My rationale here was I was keeping my queenside pawns intact by avoiding taking with the b pawn, so I could potentially long castle in the future after he ruins my structure. Better would have been b takes, where he doesn't have knight e4, and then after we trade the pieces here, I'm obviously not castling queenside, but castling kingside and then playing king h1 and using the half-open g file for the attack to double the rooks is actually quite strong. That is what I would do in any future game. So as it were, I capture with the wrong piece. He takes and then plays knight e4, which is a discovered attack on both of our queens, effectively provoking the queen trade. I pretty heavily considered bishop takes d8 versus f takes e4 here. F takes e4 I thought was worse because black gets plenty of active pieces. His queen's coming in, my king's safety is weak, I need to guard this f2 pawn, and after something like e takes d, c takes d, it's unclear where my king is going to go this game, and the pressure down the c file as well as the semi-open e file is going to be pretty massive. The move I missed here was e5, and that creates the d6 outpost and helps lock down the structure quite a bit more. I was forced to do something with this pawn because it was attacked twice and defended only once. So e5 would have been the right move. And then the computer's actually pretty optimistic about white's position here. They said that you can actually long castle and just sack the pawn, and then you have, after something like here, you have this scenario where there's opposite sides castling, but his A and B pawn are still on B7, and the F and G files are totally wide open for the rooks. So this would have been interesting. It would have been really pretty aggressive. I missed the E5 move, which effectively ruins the entire variation. As a result, I figured if my king is going to be unsafe in the middle game, it's better to have the queens off the board. So I take, and then here I make a mistake by recapturing instantly. Bishop h4 would have been a phenomenal move, simply to maintain the bishop pair, and then versus the two knights. The computer suggested bishop f6, which I didn't even consider, which is effectively saying, okay, take the bishop pair, but I'm going to force you to damage your structure about it, which is something to absolutely consider in the future. I recaptured as a function of habit, and that was pretty obviously a mistake. So I recapture immediately, I give up the bishop pair, and I play king e2, thinking that we are now in the endgame, and the king is going to be best served on e2. The computer actually liked king d2, funny enough, aligning myself with the rook in order to protect the weak c4 pawn. But play king e2, knight d7, and this is what my middle game slash end game should look like, should consist of. I had a lot of good moves here. This is effectively what I should have considered. I've got weak pawns on a2 and h2, and advancing them up the board to gain space is important. And the only way that I'm going to create a passed pawn and have winning chances in this endgame is tied to my e-pawn, f-pawn. I will eventually be able to create a passed e-pawn. So e4 is going to be my medium-term plan, as well as attempting to get rid of some of these pawn islands that I have, because right now black has 2 pawn islands and I have the 3. So that being said, a4, h4, e4 were all better moves than what I played. I played rook hg1, and it's pretty basic, pretty obvious, but I'm just trying to put the rook on the g file in order to pressure black's king. It winds up being a pretty unfortunate move, just based on what happens later in the game. The point being that all of the other moves were more versatile and eventually had to have happened or wanted to happen. So something like a4, h4, e4 would have always been good, whereas I've put my rook on the file, but it's unclear that this is the best file for the rook. For example, b5 is what my opponent played, and it's the best move in the position. I counter with the prime pawn break, a5, a6. I'm not particularly incentivized to open the a file, so I play e4, now thinking that this is obviously the move I want to play. I've got ideas of e5, f4, king e3, and then he plays knight b6, and this is a pretty critical point because I take the pawn, which totally invalidates my rook hg1 move. Something like a5 is actually considered worse by the computer, but makes better sense with respect to my position. Now that I'm locking down the queen side, I can double on the file, put pressure on this g-pawn, advance the pawns, play on the king side. a5 is worse because knight a4 is what I saw, and now we're attacking this pawn, and I have to do some gymnastics to avoid losing it, i.e. knight d2 to defend, rook c1, and then I'm not able to develop on the open file anymore. So I thought this was going to put my pieces into passive, make them too passive. Apparently e5 here, and white is fine, and you just sack the pawn. And he goes back, and you can just be in an unbalanced position where you're playing with all the most obvious moves on the king side. But I didn't love sacking the pawn, so as a result, the best move in the initial position is actually bishop c2, simply defending the pawn, provoking him to take if he wants to. This was kind of scary to play because he obviously gets rook c4 and controls a lot of dark squares in white's camp. But after e5, the computer says white's still just fine. So this is a scenario where I perhaps misevaluated and I was seeing ghosts. So as a result, I take the pawn. We trade pawns. Black has this backwards c6 pawn, but the file is now open, and black can really choose to trade at their leisure, and then this rook hg1 move makes no sense. So that was a pretty nuanced but annoying critical mistake that I made by being too overzealous. In this point, I play e5, going on with the plan. Let's create a pass pawn. The very obvious knight c4, simply positioning the knight on a beautiful square deep in my camp, controlling some dark squares. I felt obligated to take the piece. He recaptures with the b-pawn, which I think is actually a pretty serious mistake. I see where he's coming from, because after something like rook db8, he gets a lot of pressure down the file, and a lot of these pawns can become targets. But at this point, I think he's too slow. I think d takes c was the correct capture, and then he immediately needs to start pushing this pawn. So something like trading the rooks, rook bd8 again, and then playing b4, intending c3, and he gets this pawn rolling and creates his own counterplay. So as it were, he recaptures b takes c, and he does open the file for his pieces, but now it's really unclear what he's going to have to do in order to generate some sort of play on the queen side, because he doesn't really have a pass pawn. Something like a c5 break is just too slow. Here I make a mistake. I play h4. The immediate f4 was significantly better. I was worried about g5. I was thinking if I played the immediate f4, we would look at something like g5, and I would play f5 in response, but I'd have a lot of trouble advancing these e6 pawn, and I would really only, and we'd get stuck and potentially targeted, and I really wanted to take the opportunity to play f4, where, you know, after king f8, g takes f4, I'm not going to have a pair of connected pass pawns anymore, because this f7 pawn is still going to be in the way. So my thought here is to play h4 to prevent g5. Apparently it's not even a particularly good move. This is a mistake, and I think black is actually totally fine. It's a draw after the rook bd8 move that has been coming for this entire time. Point being that you have to challenge the b file, we trade, and then rook b2 check. Then you have to go c2, and there's a million ways to draw this game. You're effectively losing one of these two pawns. You can go rook a3, rook a8 check, but once this rook infiltrates to white's camp, it's pretty much drawn because you're not going to be able to protect both pawns. So, as a result, my opponent plays g6. I play f4, finally getting on with the plan. So, to be clear, g6 is a miss, and white's a little better now. F4, and then king f8 makes sense, but is not particularly good, and now white is better to the tune of plus 1.3 is what Stockfish is calling it, point being that the immediate h5 is good. He doesn't really want to take that pawn because it opens the g file, it doubles the pawns on the file, and they can be pretty easily collected. As a result, white's comfortably better. I think the best chance still is going rook db8 and trying to infiltrate and pressure some of these pawns. To my discredit, that was something I was really worried about, and a lot of these moves, including h4, h5, f4, I'm going to play king e3 eventually. I'm attempting to get all of these pawns off the back rank so I can use my king to defend the c3 pawn if I need to. So, black trades the rooks and plays knight e7, which is a big mistake. Rook b8 is still the best move, going for a queenside play, where I still find it really difficult to defend both pawns. I play king e3, which is a mistake, and I believe okay, Stockfish says I'm still fine. Plus 1.2. The immediate h takes g is strictly better. After recaptures, check. I'm infiltrating, white infiltrates on the 7th rank. There's no way that he can defend both the g6 and the c6 pawns whenever he moves his king. If we get something like blocks, I can simply go around or go back. So, regardless, he plays king e6. King e3 was my move, I apologize. That was a different variation. Black finally gets with the program, plays rook b8 intending rook b3, rook b2. An interesting note about this move is that even though king e3 was a mistake, king f3 is actually quite good. Point being that we can eventually get to the g4 square, and hopefully we can just either defend or sacrifice the pawn. That's not a real variation. Oops. Sorry for the spoilers. Point being that king f3 en route to the g4 square is actually really powerful and maintains a tremendous amount of the advantage. So squander it with king e3, which is an important endgame moment. Rook b8 is correct, but then h takes g, f takes g, rook a7 check. Black's losing material. They go king e6, rook g6 to attack the g6 pawn. He pushes it forward, and I just trade to undouble the f pawns, but even stronger was rook g6, displacing the king, and now the pawns are unstoppable. I get f5. In the game, f takes g, h takes g, and then rook takes g5. And I saw this, I played this. I didn't love my rook on g5, but I also didn't find the preceding rook f6 move with check to start advancing the pawns. So that was a miss on my part. Rook b3, and then the whole point from here on out is I finally undoubled my f pawns. I get f4. I can play f4 immediately and even sacrifice the pawn. And now the material is equal. I sacrifice the pawn back. The best move here is king e2, which I'm happy to have found. If you play king d2, which is perhaps the immediate idea, it's immediately drawn after rook f3, and then this f4 pawn can't be defended, which is in turn the pawn that's going to win the game, because now each side has a passed pawn. Difference being that this c6 pawn is backwards, and this f4 pawn is ready to advance to f5. So as a result, king e2 in response in order to guard the f3 square. My opponent played rook d3, which is logical but flawed. He's targeting the wrong pawn. It would have been better resistance to play queen c2 check, in which case we are headed into black's camp with the king, at which point we'll start advancing the pawns, and black will eventually have to sacrifice the rook. And he is just simply not going to be fast enough with the c3 pawn, because a lot of the pawn advances with the white pieces come with check. So d3, f5 check, and then everything from here on comes with check. Check, check, and then the pawn moves its way to f6, and then it's proverbial checkmate, not literal checkmate, but black doesn't have any moves anymore. He's going to get checkmated. He has to guard the back rank. Any kind of rook a3, rook h3 move to try to get to the back rank is just too slow. e7 is coming with check, and then rook g8 check will allow me to queen with check, and the black king is going to get mated. So, also of note, his back rank is covered by the pawns. So if he were to move king e8, he gets checkmated in 1. So black takes the pawn, but there was no good moves. e7, check, king e8, rook g8 check, king e7, and then you queen. And it should be checkmate on the next move. Or in several more. So that was the end of the game. I hope you found that useful. I am going to upload this, even though I've made a myriad of mistakes, and the editing is going to be non-existent. And my only hope is that you found this useful. I hope this was helpful to you. Trust that these will get better, but we're all starting from somewhere. So the Amateurs Noodle episode number 100 is going to be so much better. Thank you for being here, especially if you watched for the full 40 minutes. If you didn't, I don't blame you, but maybe check out the next video. Thank you.